filming on location today in my neighborhood in Alamogordo, New Mexico, at an elevation of 4,350 feet and an ambient air temperature today of 69 degrees. Hi folks, Dan with High Country back at you with another video. We are living in interesting times, and I don't think I have to explain that to any of you. There's a lot of concern and even some genuine fear for what might happen, and that's a fairly grim assessment, but there it is. I thought this would be an optimum time to continue my episodes on finding wild food, just in case some of you should find yourself in a situation where one meal might actually make a difference for you. Well, you say to yourself, Dan, finding wild food, you're in your neighborhood. How can we possibly find wild food there? Keep in mind that every neighborhood in America, and indeed worldwide, was once wild. And there are probably remnants of the flora and fauna that existed there before it was developed, which can be a benefit to you in a tough situation. Today we're going to be dealing with the dandelion, that ubiquitous yellow flower that everyone's familiar with. If you're a person who's serious about their lawn, the dandelion is probably the bane of your existence. But they have a lot of great properties. Let's start with the fact that every bit of the dandelion is edible. The flower, the stem, the greenery, and the roots, all edible, cooked, or raw. Now that does come with a caveat. There are people out there who do have dandelion allergies. I have no way of knowing if you're one of those people. That's not something I can determine for you, and it is certainly something you're going to want to know before you start harvesting dandelions as food. But now that you've got the basics, let's get right down into it. So here we are in our dandelion patch, and I know you're thinking to yourself, well, Dan, of course we are. Look at the yellow flowers. Those are obviously dandelions. That is not always the case. There are a number of other plants, collectively known as false dandelions, which can sometimes be identified as dandelion, and you definitely do not want to eat them. Plants like cat's ear, colt's foot, and I believe it's hawksbane is the other common one, hawk something. In any case, there's a couple of things you can look for to confirm that you're looking at a dandelion. Let's see if I can find one. Here's a good one. You'll notice you have a single flower on a single stem. There will often be multiple flowers coming from a single plant, but they will always be on a single stem. The stems will be smooth, and they will have no scales or hairs on them. And the other interesting thing, let me see if I can demonstrate this. It's not going to come across real well. Let's see here. As you can see, the stems are hollow, like a drinking straw. That may not be coming through really clear, but they are hollow stems, and there'll be a milky substance coming out the end, which is actually a latex. This is one of the very few plants that you can safely eat that have got a milky colored fluid. But you can see the stems are hollow, they'll be smooth and hairless, and they'll have a single flower coming from each one. I'll get you a close-up of that. There we go, a single flower on each stem. And as I said, the stems will be smooth, hairless, and hollow. So that's something you need to look out for. Now, I've heard people say that you can tell from the leaves, the shape of the leaves, the edges, and that is not entirely true. I have seen dandelions that have leaves of a number of different shapes, so I wouldn't count on that to ID your dandelion. So, we've talked a little about how to make sure we're getting the right plant. Now let's get to harvesting them. I've harvested a dandelion from off camera so that I can demonstrate the various pieces of the plant or show you what they are. Below ground, subterranean, you're going to have a single large taproot, as we see here. It will have fine root hairs on it, but it'll be a single large taproot of varying lengths. Edible cooked or raw, but not particularly delicious in that fashion in any case. You can eat them and they'll be fine. They'll give you something to fill your belly. But what's normally done with them is you separate the root, wash it, roast it, grind it, and then use it as a coffee filler or coffee substitute, in which case it is very delicious. Now, it's a fairly lengthy process, so I'll do a separate video on that. Coming up from there, we're going to run into the leaves. The leaves, because of the way this plant grows, are going to be youngest and tenderest at the center of the rosette, tougher and older toward the outside. Again, edible cooked or raw, but they are fairly bitter when they're raw, particularly the older leaves on the outside. What you'll generally do, the procedure here, is to either boil, steam, or blanch them to get some of that bitterness out, and you can pan fry them or something of that nature. Now, I know people who like dandelion leaves just fine. They make salads out of them. For me, I prefer that they be boiled or steamed to get that bitterness out, and then I'll pan fry them. Now, up from there, you're going to have the actual flowering heart of the plant. Again, as I said, on an individual stem, each flower will be on an individual stem. And that is what we're going to concentrate on today. We're going to harvest and cook some of these flowering heads. Now, let's talk about the overall value of the dandelion. In terms of nutrition, they are high in vitamin A, C, and K. They also contain calcium, potassium, iron, and manganese in trace amounts, so there is some nutritional value to them. Your average dandelion is going to be about 86% water, about 9% carbohydrates, 3% protein, and 1% fat, so they do have some nutritional content. And finally, in terms of caloric content, a 3.5 ounces, or roughly 100 grams, is going to have between 45 and 50 calories. So it's not a huge amount, but it actually does have both nutritional and caloric value. So now that you've learned a little bit about the plant, let me harvest some of the flower heads and we'll take it into the kitchen. We've gathered together our dandelion flowers, and now we're going to move on to the next step, which is processing them. Now, I will say this, if you like, you can simply take a whole flower, greenery on the back and all, and you can dip them in batter and pan fry them, or as I mentioned earlier, you can eat them just the way they are, raw. Personally, I like to strip the greens off because I'm going to use these to make fritters. Now, how much do you need? That depends on how much you want to make. Today we're working with 1 cup because I'm not going to make a huge batch. So we're just working with 1 cup of dandelion flowers, and we'll strip them down to the petals. So the process here is really simple. What I found is pretty easy is to break the entire bud in half and set one part aside. And now you've got access to all those yellow petals inside. And they come off really easily. Just gentle pressure will pull them off in your fingers, and then set those aside in another dish because that's what we're going to use to make our fritters. So just strip those yellow petals and put them aside. You don't have to get them all. Don't be crazy about this. Just strip as many as you can. And when you're done, you're going to be left with some greenery with probably a couple of yellow petals attached. Now, don't dispose of that greenery. We can use that along with the leaves in our spinach-like dish that we'll do in another recipe, but don't dispose of those. Hold on to them. So that's the goal here, is you're just going to strip as many of these as you can until you've got them all down to just the petals, and you've got a nice bowl of just those yellow flower petals. And that's what we're going to use to make our fritters. You can also make a really nice risotto with these. And again, I prefer to not have the greens in it for the risotto. The other thing you can do with these petals, once you've got some of them stripped, is simply just dust them onto a salad. It adds some color, some flavor you don't normally get. But as I mentioned, today we're going to make fritters. So just keep stripping and setting aside your greenery until your bowl's empty. And then you're ready to go with the next step. And I'll bring you back when it's time for that. Okay, we've processed our dandelion flowers down into just dandelion petals. And that cup of dandelion flowers turned into about half a cup of dandelion petals. Now, I'm not sure this is going to come through well on camera or not, but my fingers have actually been dyed yellow from the processing, and that is from the coloring in the petals. One of the traditional uses of dandelions was to actually make a yellow dye. So that is what your petals are going to look like. There are some greens in there, and don't let that be a problem. As I said earlier, the entire plant is edible. I just like to get as much of the greens out as possible for making fritters. So let's move on to the fritter step. Well, here we have our bowl of dandelion flower petals. As I said, it's been reduced down to about half a cup. Now to that, we're going to want to add about a half a cup of flour. And then let's stir that up just a little bit so we don't have clumps. Try and get it combined a little so that when we add the milk, it'll be a little smoother. Now you can use self-rising flour. If you don't have self-rising flour, you just have regular bread flour or something of that nature, that's okay. Just add a pinch of baking soda to give it some leavening. Now, you don't have to get crazy about this. It'll get mixed up a little more when we put the milk in it, but let's just get some flour mixed in with the petals until we're about like so. Now we're going to add milk until we get to the right consistency. This isn't precise because we're going to be using a slightly imprecise amount of dandelion petals, etc. So we're just going to add milk until we get the right consistency, and it doesn't have to be warm milk. Cold will do just fine. So add a little and stir in. Now that's probably not going to be enough. It's going to be a little bit too dry, but we'll find out. I can tell you right now it's going to be a little too dry, and that's okay. Let's add a little bit more milk. We're probably going to get up in the, half a cup of milk range, although I won't swear to that. You're just going to add milk and stir and keep trying to get all that flour worked in so we don't have dry patches until it's a fairly gluey mass. Now this is not like a lot of bread you generally make because it's a fritter, and everybody's got their own different fritter recipe. But I like it to be fairly soupy because it'll help. I think it gets a good crust on it when it fries. So there's what we're looking for. You don't want it to be soaking wet like breakfast cereal. Like thick cream of wheat or thick oatmeal, something of that nature will generally be fine. Just it'll slowly come off the spoon. We just stir it up in there until you're ready to go. And then that is how we're going to make our fritters. And that, folks, is all there is to it. Just stir your flour and your milk in with your dandelion petals until you've got a nice gluey mass. Now let's go to the pan. We've got our skillet preheated, so let's add a little bit of butter to the bottom. Now we're just below medium heat here. It doesn't have to be super hot, that's not the point. We'll get this butter around the skillet a little bit. And then we're going to add our mix. Now just get yourself a big spoonful. This isn't precision, folks. You're not Wolfgang Puck. We're making stuff at home. So don't concern yourself with this. Just get a big spoonful. And we're going to put it right in the middle. Now we'll let that cook for a minute to get a little crust on that one side. Then we're going to flip it over, and then it'll be firm enough for us to do more with. So we'll give it a couple of seconds. It's not going to take long. This is not a long recipe to do. You'll notice once we get it thinner, it'll be a little more manageable. Now it doesn't take too long, as I said, just to get a little crust on that other side. And then we'll go ahead and flip it over. There we go. Now we can use our spatula to squish it down a little bit and get it to a more reasonable thickness. Now, as I said earlier, everybody's got their own fritter recipe, so you don't have to do this my way. This is just the way that I like to do it. So we're going to give it a couple of minutes on that side till it's golden brown. Then we'll flip it back to this side that we've got pre-cooked. We'll golden brown it there, and I'll bring you back when it's ready to go. Okay, we are just about there. We've got it golden brown on this side, as you can see. And the other side, I believe, is ready to go. So we're going to make a switcheroo here. Let's take our fritter and get it out of our cast iron skillet and onto a plate. So there we are, folks. One dandelion fritter. That's what it's going to look like. You can make it round, square. You can make it blobby. This is your call. We just want to make sure that it's cooked enough. As I said, the dandelions can be eaten raw, but raw flour is not generally very tasty. So you want to get it cooked enough that your flour that goes in with the dandelion leaves is ready to go. So let's come back when it's time for a bite. Well, let's try our taste test here. That's nice. Really, it's delicately flavored. It's not strong like, I'm having trouble coming up with something. It's not a very strong flavor. It's a very delicate flavor, but quite nice. Well, folks, I hope it's been educational and entertaining. This is perhaps a way to teach you how to use something that's in your yard that would otherwise be considered waste as actual food, particularly in the times that we're in when it might be really important. If it has been beneficial and educational, and if you've enjoyed it a little bit, I hope you'll come back and see us again. I'm Dan with High Country. We'll catch you next time.